At 8:17 on a Tuesday morning, after 27 years with the same company, I was escorted out of the building carrying a cardboard box. At 9:06 the next morning, the man who replaced me called and asked for my signature on an $82 million contract. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend the timing was awkward. He just said, "Jack, we need you to sign page 47 and send it back before noon." I looked at the severance envelope sitting unopened on my kitchen table. Then I looked through the window at the old maple tree my wife and I had planted when our daughter was born. "Blake," I said, "yesterday your security guard told me I no longer worked for Harlan Industrial." There was a pause. "Right," he said, "but this is just administrative." It wasn't administrative. It was the one signature that told the client every pressure system in that contract had been designed, tested, and documented according to the standards I had spent most of my adult life enforcing. And Blake knew it. What he didn't know was that I had already seen the changes he made after pushing me out. He also didn't know that buried in Appendix 14 of the contract was a clause with my full legal name in it. By Friday afternoon, the contract was frozen. Federal inspectors were walking through the plant, and the company president was sitting in my living room asking me what it would take to make the problem go away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Jack Mercer. I was 58 years old when this happened, and until that Tuesday morning, I had worked at Harlan Industrial Systems outside Toledo, Ohio, for 27 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Not that I was counting. Harlan built industrial pump and pressure control systems, the kind of equipment most people never notice, even though hospitals, power plants, water facilities, and factories depend on it every day. Our systems didn't sit in shiny showrooms. They lived behind concrete walls, under steel platforms, and inside buildings where the air smelled like hot metal and cutting fluid. I started there in 1998 as a field technician. Back then, the company had 1 building, 43 employees, and a founder named Paul Harlan who knew every machinist by name. Paul wore the same brown work boots for at least 10 years. He could walk past a running pump and tell from the vibration whether the shaft alignment was off. He was the first boss I ever had who cared more about whether something was right than whether it was fast. When I was 36, a valve assembly failed during a test. Nobody got hurt, but a steel fitting crossed the room hard enough to bury itself in a plywood barrier. I spent 3 nights going through drawings and inspection reports until I found the problem. 2 nearly identical alloys had been stored in the same rack. I expected Paul to fire the warehouse supervisor. Instead, he shut production down for 2 days, paid everyone, and had us redesign the entire material control system. Then he paid for me to finish my engineering degree at night. "A mistake is tuition," he told me. "You only waste the money if you don't learn anything." That sentence stayed with me. Over the years, I became a licensed professional engineer, then quality manager, then director of engineering compliance. I wasn't the smartest engineer in the building, and I never claimed to be. But I knew our systems from the loading dock to the customer's final inspection. I knew which welders could handle an emergency repair, which suppliers answered their phones at 2 in the morning, and which clauses in a 500-page specification could shut down an entire project. By the time Paul retired, Harlan had 312 employees and contracts across 7 states. His son Evan took over. Evan wasn't stupid. That would have been easier. Stupid people usually reveal themselves quickly. Evan was polished, ambitious, and very good at making a bad decision sound like a strategy. He had an MBA, expensive teeth, and a habit of calling layoffs head count optimization. He replaced the framed photographs of completed projects in the lobby with flat-screen televisions showing quarterly metrics. He stopped walking through the shop because, according to him, leadership needed to stay above the operational noise. For the first few years, we managed each other. He thought I was old-fashioned. I thought he treated spreadsheets like they were more real than machinery. But profits rose, the work stayed safe, and Paul was still chairman of the board, so there were limits to how far Evan could push. Then Paul had a stroke. He survived, but he stepped away completely. Within 6 months, Evan hired his 32-year-old nephew, Blake Sutton, as Vice President of Operational Transformation. Nobody knew what that title meant. Blake, least of all. He had worked for a consulting firm in Chicago for 4 years and had never set foot inside an industrial plant before joining us. On his first shop tour, he pointed to a rack of hydrostatic test plugs and asked why we were keeping obsolete inventory. One of the machinists had to explain that the project on the next bay could not be pressure tested without them. Blake smiled and said, "Exactly. That's the kind of legacy thinking we need to challenge." The machinist looked at me. I looked at the ceiling. That was how it started. Around the same time, Harlan began bidding on the largest contract in its history. North River Utilities was rebuilding 4 aging natural gas compression stations across the Midwest. They needed 12 custom pressure control modules, each the size of a small house, delivered over 30 months. The contract was worth $82 million. If we won it, it would keep most of the plant busy for almost 3 years. I wanted that project badly. Not for Evan, and certainly not for Blake. I wanted it for the people on the floor. Men like Luis Mendoza, who had 2 kids in college. Women like Teresa Hall, who ran our non-destructive testing team and had been with me for 19 years. Guys like Ron Cates, who complained about everything but had never once let a bad weld leave his station. North River had been burned by a previous supplier. A pressure regulator at one of their sites failed after the supplier quietly substituted a cheaper internal component. Nobody died, but the station was offline for 6 weeks, and the repair cost millions. So North River made compliance the center of the new bid. They didn't just approve companies, they approved people. Their technical team interviewed me 3 times. They reviewed my license, my project history, and even an incident report I had written 15 years earlier. At the end of the process, their chief engineer, a woman named Dana Cole, named me as the engineer of record and key compliance officer in the contract. That designation mattered. It meant I was personally responsible for certifying the design basis, approving material substitutions, and signing each final conformity package. Harlan could replace me, but only after giving North River 30 days' notice and receiving written approval of a qualified substitute. The clause was in Appendix 14. I pointed it out during our final internal review. "This is a key person commitment," I told Evan, Blake, and our general counsel. "If my role changes, North River has to approve it first." Evan barely looked up from his phone. "You planning to go somewhere?" he asked. "No." "Then it's not an issue." That should have warned me. We won the contract in March. Evan rang the brass bell in the lobby, ordered barbecue for the whole plant, and gave a speech about bold leadership. He mentioned Blake 6 times. He didn't mention the engineering or production teams once. I didn't care. We had the work. For the next 5 months, my team built the design package for the first 3 modules. North River was demanding, but fair. Every valve, fitting, weld procedure, test instrument, and software revision had to be traceable. It was slow work. It was also the kind of work where slow was cheaper than wrong. Then Blake began holding what he called margin recovery sessions. The first one took place in a glass conference room overlooking the production floor. Blake stood in front of a screen showing a red number, $4.6 million. "That," he said, Is the value we are leaving on the table because of conservative engineering choices? I asked him what choices he meant. He clicked to a slide listing valves, fasteners, sensors, and inspection steps. He wanted to replace the specified American-made control valves with a cheaper imported model. He wanted to reduce radiographic testing on certain welds. He wanted to combine 2 factory acceptance tests into one. North River approved the current design, I said. They approved the function, Blake replied. We own the means. Not under this contract. He smiled the way people smile when they think patience is proof of superiority. Jack, I respect your experience, but you were trained in a zero-risk culture. Modern operations balance risk against value. I looked through the glass wall at a pressure vessel suspended from an overhead crane. That vessel will operate at 2,400 pounds per square inch, I said. You don't balance documentation risk after it's installed beside a crew of human beings. Evan leaned back in his chair. Nobody is asking you to make it unsafe. You're asking me to approve changes before the engineering review. We're asking you to be commercially aware. That phrase came up a lot over the next few weeks. Whenever I rejected an undocumented change, I wasn't commercially aware. When Teresa refused to reduce an inspection sample, she wasn't commercially aware. When procurement warned that Blake's preferred valve supplier had no verified service history in our application, procurement wasn't commercially aware. The supplier was called Apex Flow Solutions. Its price was 41% lower than the North River approved supplier. I asked for test records. Blake sent me a glossy brochure. I asked for material certificates. He sent me a link to the company website. I asked for references from installations operating above 2,000 psi. He stopped answering my emails. Then parts from Apex began arriving anyway. Teresa called me to receiving one afternoon. She held one valve under a bright inspection lamp and pointed to the body marking. Heat number doesn't match the certificate, she said. I checked the paperwork. She was right. For anyone outside manufacturing, a heat number is like a metal component's birth certificate. It ties that piece of material back to the batch it came from and proves what it is made of. If the number on the component doesn't match the document is useless. I put the shipment on hold. 20 minutes later, Blake stormed into my office. You just stopped $180,000 of material. The certificates don't match. The supplier says it's a clerical issue. Then the supplier can correct it. We have a schedule. We also have a contract. He shut my office door. Do you understand how difficult you make everything? He asked. I remember feeling strangely calm. Yes, I said. That's why the customer put my name in Appendix 14. His face changed for half a second. Then the smile returned. Nobody is irreplaceable, Jack. That's true, I said. But replacements still need approval. 3 weeks later, Human Resources scheduled a meeting for 7:30 in the morning. I knew what it was the moment I saw the invitation. The subject line said, Organizational Alignment. Nobody schedules good news before the coffee is ready. My wife, Ellen, noticed I was quiet at breakfast. Something wrong? She asked. Maybe. The contract? Maybe me. She put down her coffee mug. Ellen and I had been married 34 years. She taught 8th grade English for most of them, which meant she could detect dishonesty at a distance most radar systems would envy. Do not sign anything in that room, she said. I know. You say that now, then somebody puts a folder in front of you and says it's standard. I won't sign, she pointed at me. Bring the folder home. At 7:29, I walked into the conference room. Evan was there with our HR director, Melissa Grant. Blake wasn't. That told me everything. Melissa asked me to sit down. There was a cardboard box beside the wall. Evan folded his hands on the table. Jack, as part of our ongoing transformation, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position. I had imagined that moment a dozen times after receiving the invitation. In some versions, I argued. In others, I told Evan exactly what I thought of him. In reality, I just looked at the man I had known since he was a college kid visiting his father's plant. "You're eliminating the engineer of record position during the North River contract?" I asked. "The responsibilities are being distributed." "To whom?" He glanced at Melissa. "Blake will oversee the transition with support from the engineering team." "Blake isn't an engineer. He'll oversee the function, not perform the technical work." "Who will sign?" Evan's jaw tightened. "We're not here to debate the organizational structure." Melissa pushed a folder toward me. 12 weeks of severance, continuation of health coverage through the end of the quarter, and a broad release of claims. The agreement also said I would provide reasonable transitional assistance, if requested. There it was. They wanted my signature after they removed my salary, authority, access, and insurance. I closed the folder. "I'll have someone review it." Melissa nodded. Evan looked annoyed. Security met me outside my office. The guard was a guy named Calvin who had worked nights at the plant for 6 years. He looked more embarrassed than I felt. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," he said quietly. "You're doing your job, Cal." I packed 2 framed photographs, a coffee mug my daughter gave me, Paul Harlan's old brass pressure gauge, and a wooden nameplate Ron had made in the machine shop. 27 years fit into one box with room left over. As we walked across the engineering floor, conversation stopped. Teresa stood beside the printer with her arms folded. Luis stared at his screen. Ron looked directly at me and gave one slow nod. I wanted to say something reassuring. I couldn't think of anything honest. Outside, Calvin handed me my visitor-free badge and watched me place the box in my truck. "They know the client approved you personally, right?" he asked. "They know." That was what I believed at the time. At home, I set the box in the garage. I didn't want it in the house yet. Ellen came out and wrapped her arms around me without saying anything. For the first hour, I was angry. For the second, I was embarrassed that I was angry. By lunchtime, fear arrived. I was 58. Our mortgage was almost paid off, but not quite. We had savings, but I had planned to work until 63. My health insurance now had an expiration date. Every article I had ever seen about older professionals struggling to find work suddenly felt written directly to me. Ellen made sandwiches. I barely touched mine. "Maybe I should sign the severance," I said. "Maybe," she replied, "after a lawyer reads it. 12 weeks is better than nothing. And what are they buying with it?" I looked at the folder. She was right. The language about transitional assistance was vague enough to cover almost anything. That afternoon, I called an employment attorney named Sarah Kim, whom Teresa had used during a contract dispute years earlier. Sarah couldn't meet until Thursday, but her assistant told me not to sign, delete, send, or promise anything before then. So I did nothing. That may have been the smartest decision I made all week. The next morning at 9:06, Blake called. "Jack, we need you to sign page 47 and send it back before noon." After I reminded him that I no longer worked there, he gave a little laugh. "The package was basically complete before you left. We just need to close the loop." "Which package?" "Module 1 conformity release." I sat up straighter. The Module 1 release was not due for another 2 weeks. "Send me the entire revision-controlled package," I said. "Drawings, bill of materials, deviation log, test results, and supplier certificates. That's hundreds of pages. Then it's strange you think one signature is administrative. His tone hardened. You reviewed the system while you were here. I reviewed Revision C. What revision are you releasing? Silence. Revision F, he finally said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I have never seen Revision F. The changes are commercial, not technical. Then you won't need my engineering signature. Jack, the company expects reasonable transition support under your separation agreement. I haven't signed a separation agreement. Another pause. Evan said you would cooperate. Evan fired me. I ended the call. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Blake's assistant with a single PDF attached. The message said, Per Blake, please execute signature page and return. The PDF was 49 pages, not hundreds. Most of the supporting records were missing, but Blake had made one mistake. Page 32 contained a revision summary. Revision D changed the control valve manufacturer from the approved supplier to Apex Flow Solutions. Revision E reduced radiographic inspection on 12 critical welds. Revision F accepted alternate material traceability based on supplier certification. Those weren't commercial changes. They were exactly the changes I had refused to approve. And at the bottom of page 47, beneath the empty signature line, my name and license number had already been typed in. I saved the email and the attachment to a separate drive. Then I wrote a 4-sentence response. I have not reviewed or approved revisions D, E, or F. I cannot certify the attached conformity release. I do not authorize Harlan Industrial Systems or any employee to apply my signature, electronic credential, engineering seal, or license number to these documents. Please preserve this correspondence with the project record. I copied Evan, Melissa, Harlan's general counsel, and Dana Cole at North River. I stared at Dana's address for nearly a minute before clicking send. Part of me worried I was violating some unwritten rule. You were supposed to handle company problems inside the company. You were supposed to protect the place that had paid your mortgage and put your daughter through college. But Harlan had removed me from inside the company, and they were trying to use my professional license to certify work I had never seen. At 9:41, Dana replied, Received. Do not sign anything. I will contact you directly. At 9:44, Evan called. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:46, he called again. At 9:49, Melissa called. At 9:52, Harlan's general counsel sent an email instructing me to preserve all company confidential information and stop communicating with the client. At 10:03, Dana called. Jack, are you still Harlan's engineer of record? She asked. I was terminated yesterday morning. There was a long silence. We were not notified. I assumed you had been. Appendix 14 requires 30 days' notice and written approval before any key person change. I know. Did Harlan identify a replacement? Not to me. Did you approve the apex valves? No. The reduced weld inspection? No. The material traceability deviation? Absolutely not. I heard papers moving on her end. Thank you, she said. I'm issuing a stop work notice. That was the moment the $82 million contract stopped. North River froze fabrication, payments, and material releases. Nothing connected to the project could move without written authorization. Dana also requested a formal audit of every design revision and every component already purchased. By noon, the plant knew. I knew because my phone began filling with messages. Some people were supportive. Some were scared. One anonymous message called me a bitter old man trying to destroy the company on my way out. That one hurt more than I expected. I had no desire to destroy Harlan. My friends worked there. The company had been part of my life longer than my daughter had. But if I signed that package, I would be placing my name on decisions Blake made specifically because I said they were unsafe and undocumented. There are moments when loyalty and obedience look like the same thing from a distance. They are not. At 2:30, Evan finally left a voicemail. "Jack, this situation has escalated unnecessarily. Nobody intended to misuse your credentials. We need to discuss a practical resolution before more damage is done." He made it sound as if the damage began when I refused to hide it. I forwarded the voicemail to Sarah Kim. She moved our appointment to that afternoon. Sarah's office was above a bakery in downtown Toledo. She listened without interrupting as I explained the contract, the firing, Blake's call, and the signature page. Then she read the severance agreement. They want a release of employment claims, a confidentiality promise, continuing technical assistance, and ownership of anything you produce during that assistance, she said, in exchange for 12 weeks of pay. Is that normal? Normal is not the same as reasonable. She looked at the email with my typed license number. Your professional obligations are separate from your employment obligations. You did the right thing by giving clear notice that you had not approved the work. Their lawyer told me to stop talking to North River. Their lawyer represents them. That sentence was obvious, but I needed to hear it. Sarah advised me to communicate in writing, avoid speculation, and provide only records I was legally entitled to possess. No dramatic accusations, no social media, no calls to reporters. Just dates, documents, and facts. People who rely on confusion hate a clean timeline, she said. So we built one. Tuesday, 7:30 a.m., position eliminated. Wednesday, 9:06 a.m., request for signature on unseen revision F. Wednesday, 9:28 a.m., written refusal and notice against use of credentials. Wednesday, 10:03 a.m., North River confirms it received no notice of termination or replacement. It wasn't exciting. It was devastating. The next morning, Teresa called from her personal phone. "Can you talk?" she asked. "As long as you don't share anything confidential." "I'm not calling about designs. I'm calling about your stamp." My hand tightened around the phone. Every licensed engineer has a seal. Ours were applied through a controlled digital system. When I was terminated, my credentials should have been disabled immediately. "What about it?" Blake asked IT whether they could restore your approval workflow long enough to issue the package. "What did IT say?" "No." Then he asked one of the document control specialists whether she had an image of your old seal from a PDF. I closed my eyes. "Did she give it to him?" "No. She reported it to Melissa." "How do you know?" "Because she was crying in my office afterward. I told Teresa not to send me files or risk her job. I asked only whether she was willing to tell the truth if North River's auditors asked." "Every word," she said. By then, the issue was bigger than a contract dispute. Attempting to apply an engineer's seal without authorization could trigger licensing and fraud investigations. Sarah helped me send a factual notice to the State Engineering Board. Again, no claims about motives. Just the document, the request, and the report that someone sought an image of my seal. On Thursday afternoon, North River's audit team arrived at Harlan. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. 3 people in dark safety glasses walking past the lobby televisions while Evan tried to control the conversation. Dana requested the original approved bill of materials, every purchase order tied to Apex, all deviation approvals, the weld inspection plan, and the access logs for the digital signature system. Blake's margin recovery disappeared very quickly when people started asking for names and timestamps. The first major finding came from the valves Teresa had quarantined. Apex's certificate listed the correct alloy, but the foundry heat number belonged to a different grade of steel. Whether that was fraud or incompetence wasn't immediately clear. What was clear was that the parts could not be installed. The second finding came from the pricing records. Apex Flow Solutions had been incorporated only 14 months earlier. One of its minority owners was the father of Blake's college roommate. Blake had never disclosed the relationship. That didn't prove he was receiving money. It did prove he had pushed an unqualified supplier through approval while hiding a personal connection. The third finding was the one that reached the board. Someone in finance finally read Appendix 14. If Harlan removed named key personnel without North River's approval, North River could suspend work immediately, recover audit costs, and terminate the agreement for default. The clause also allowed North River to charge Harlan for schedule delays caused by the unauthorized change. My name appeared 5 times. Evan had signed the contract. He had simply never read the appendix. Friday morning, I was repairing a loose hinge on our back gate when a black SUV stopped in front of the house. Evan stepped out wearing a navy suit and no tie. He looked as if he hadn't slept. Ellen came onto the porch. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. "Please." Evan noticed her and forced a smile. "I was hoping Jack and I could speak privately." Ellen folded her arms. "Then you should have treated him better when privacy was part of the job." I almost smiled. We sat in the living room. Evan placed a new folder on the coffee table. "The board wants to resolve this," he said. "What does resolve mean? We reinstate you effective immediately. Same title, 15% salary increase, full vesting of your retention benefit. You sign the Module 1 package after an expedited review, and you communicate to North River that the personnel issue was an administrative misunderstanding." Was it? "Jack, mistakes were made. That sentence doesn't contain a person." His eyes narrowed. "Blake moved too aggressively. You fired me. Based on his restructuring recommendation. You were in the room." For the first time since he arrived, Evan looked away. "What do you want?" he asked. There it was. He still believed this was about leverage. He thought I had frozen the contract to negotiate a better salary. "I don't want my old job back." He blinked. "You just spent 2 days proving they can't continue without you." "No, I proved they can't use my name without me. 300 people depend on this contract. I know every one of them better than you do. Then help me protect their jobs." The anger I'd been carrying finally sharpened into something useful. "You don't get to put those jobs on my shoulders after gambling with them," I said. "You ignored the contract, overruled quality control, bought unverified parts, and removed the person the client required. The people on that floor didn't do that. You did." Evan's voice dropped. "North River is considering termination. Then give them a reason not to. That's why I'm here." I slid the folder back toward him. "Reinstating me doesn't restore trust, and I will not sign a single document as a Harlan employee while Blake controls the project. So this is revenge." I thought about that. Maybe part of it was. I was human. I wanted Blake to feel the same helplessness he had created for me. I wanted Evan to understand that experience wasn't office furniture he could throw out and retrieve from the curb when convenient. But I also pictured Luis, Teresa, Ron, and hundreds of people who had mortgages of their own. "No," I said. "Revenge would be letting you fail without telling you how to stop it." I gave him my conditions. First, Harlan would accept an independent engineering and quality audit covering every North River module. Second, all Apex material would remain quarantined until traceability was verified by a third party. Third, no employee who cooperated with the audit could be disciplined or terminated for doing so. Fourth, Blake would have no authority over engineering, quality, procurement, or the North River project while the investigation continued. Fifth, Harlan would notify North River in writing that I had not approved revisions D, E, or F, and that my termination was not an administrative mistake. Finally, I would not return as an employee. If North River wanted my help, It could retain me independently. My duty would be to the integrity of the project, not to Evan's quarterly numbers. Evan stared at me. You've been planning this. I've had 48 hours. The board will never agree to all of that. Then you don't need my signature. He stood. At the door, he turned back. My father trusted you. That was a low blow, and he knew it. Your father taught me not to learn the wrong lesson from an expensive mistake, I said. Evan left without another word. For the rest of Friday, nothing happened. That was the hardest part. When you make a decision that could affect hundreds of people, silence becomes a machine that manufactures doubt. I replayed every conversation. Maybe I had moved too fast. Maybe I should have signed the severance, taken the money, and let the company choose another engineer. Maybe my conditions would push North River toward cancellation. That evening, Ron called. You didn't hear this from me, he said, but the board put Blake on leave. I said nothing. And they told everybody the audit is continuing Monday. Good. Guys are scared, Jack. I know. Are we going to lose the work? I couldn't promise him anything. North River needs the modules, I said. If Harlan proves it can build them correctly, the contract can survive. And if it can't, then pretending won't save it. Ron was quiet. For what it's worth, he said. Nobody on the floor blames you. After we hung up, I sat in the garage beside the box from my office. I took out Paul's brass pressure gauge. The face was scratched, and the needle had been stuck at 0 for years. On the back, Paul had engraved 6 words when I became quality manager. Your name means you checked it. I had forgotten about that engraving. Monday morning, Dana Cole called. North River is not comfortable with Harlan managing its own recovery, she said. We're appointing an independent technical representative. That makes sense. We'd like it to be you. I didn't answer immediately. You would report to North River, she continued. You would have authority to review design changes, witness testing, and recommend acceptance or rejection. Harlan would be required to provide access under the contract. You would not supervise Harlan employees. Evan won't like that. Mr. Harlan's preferences are not part of our recovery plan. For the first time in a week, I laughed. Dana offered a 6-month consulting agreement at a rate that worked out to almost double my old salary, even after paying for insurance and taxes. More important, the agreement stated clearly that I could not be directed by Harlan management. I asked Sarah to review it. Then I signed. Not page 47. My own contract. I returned to the plant Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after being escorted out. Calvin was at the security desk. This time, instead of taking my badge, he handed me a temporary credential printed with the words, North River Authorized Representative. Looks good on you, he said. The lobby televisions were off. Evan met me outside the main conference room with Harlan's attorney and 2 board members. He didn't shake my hand. Your access will be limited to North River-related areas and records, the attorney said. That's all I need. All document requests should go through counsel. Dana, standing beside me, answered before I could. The contract requires direct and timely access. Counsel may observe. Counsel may not delay. We began with the valves. Every Apex component was moved into a locked quarantine area. An accredited laboratory tested material samples. More than a third failed to match the certificates provided. Some were the wrong alloy. Others met the alloy requirement, but lacked valid heat traceability. None could be used. Then we reviewed the weld inspection changes. Blake had reduced testing based on a memo drafted by a junior engineer. The engineer told auditors he had been instructed to write the conclusion before seeing the production data. The original test plan was restored. Finally, we examined the signature workflow. IT logs showed Blake had requested temporary access to my disabled approval account 2 hours after I was fired. IT refused. The document control specialist confirmed that he then asked for an image of my seal. Blake called it a misunderstanding. The board called it cause for termination. He was gone by Wednesday afternoon. Evan lasted 3 more weeks. The board did not fire him publicly. Officially, he stepped down to support an orderly leadership transition. In reality, North River told the board that the contract would be terminated if Evan retained operational control during the recovery. The board chose $82 million over his title. I expected to enjoy that news more than I did. Instead, I felt tired. Evan had inherited a healthy company, a skilled workforce, and a name people trusted. He nearly lost all 3 because he wanted savings to appear before the work was done. That wasn't satisfying. It was wasteful. The recovery took 4 months. Harlan had to scrap or return almost $600,000 in Apex material. The company paid for additional inspections, expedited replacements, and North River's audit costs. The first module delivery slipped by 7 weeks, but the contract survived. The board appointed Teresa interim director of quality. She had earned the job years earlier. Ron and his crew rebuilt the affected assemblies. Luis organized weekend shifts to recover the testing schedule, with overtime paid properly instead of disguised as team commitment. Nobody who cooperated with the audit lost a job. When the first completed module reached final acceptance, I stood beside Dana in the test bay. The pumps were running, gauges steady, weld records complete, material certificates matched. Teresa handed me the conformity package. This time, it was Revision G. I read every page. Then I signed page 47. Ron started clapping. Luis joined him. Within seconds, most of the test bay was applauding. I'm not embarrassed to admit I had to look down for a moment. Not because I had defeated Evan or Blake. Not because I was making more money. Because the signature finally meant what it was supposed to mean. I had checked it. 6 months later, North River extended my consulting agreement and introduced me to 2 other suppliers that needed compliance support. I formed a small company called Mercer Technical Assurance. Teresa helped me choose the name. Ellen designed the logo, although she claimed she was only fixing the font. I work about 30 hours a week now, some weeks more, some less. I choose the projects. I spend more time teaching younger engineers than sitting in meetings, which suits me fine. Harlan is still operating. The lobby television screens came back eventually, but now they alternate financial metrics with project quality data. Paul's original photographs are hanging on the opposite wall. I visited Paul once after everything settled. His speech was slower after the stroke, but his mind was clear. We sat on his back porch and watched squirrels raid a bird feeder. "Evan says you cost him his company," Paul said. "I'm sorry." Paul shook his head. "Wasn't his yet," he said. "He was borrowing it from the people who built it." Then he asked whether the first module passed. "Every test," I told him. He nodded. That was all he needed to know. People sometimes ask whether I regret copying North River on that first email. They say I could have handled it quietly, negotiated a bigger severance, or signed the package with a written limitation. No. A signature is not decoration. It is not a favor you do for a former employer. It is a statement that your judgment stands behind the work. Harlan's executives thought they owned my judgment because they had paid my salary for 27 years. They believed they could remove the man and keep the name. They learned otherwise. If I had signed, maybe nothing would have failed. Maybe every cheaper valve would have worked. Maybe every reduced inspection would have missed nothing. But safety cannot depend on maybe, and integrity cannot exist only when it is convenient. I didn't get revenge by destroying the company. I got it by refusing to help powerful men hide what they had done, and by helping the people who actually built the company survive their mistakes. They fired me because they thought experience was expensive. Then they discovered what it cost to operate without it. So let me ask you this. If you had been in my position, would you have let the company lose the contract? Or would you have gone back to protect the workers after the people at the top betrayed you? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe a person's name should still mean something, subscribe for the next story.